How's it going, guys? Vaibhav here and welcome back to another video. Now, I'm pretty sure you've all seen or heard of WWDC 2020, and I just want to say Apple did a phenomenal job with that presentation. It was such a smooth flowing one, and they encapsulated all their information in a very cohesive manner. I really wish more manufacturers would do this over time, so I hope they can take inspiration from Apple, and I hope Apple continues this sort of conference style because I think it benefits everyone at the end of the day. But WWDC basically showcased the newest software for Apple's hardware products, and one of the softwares they showcased was iOS 14. Now, I happen to have the iPhone 7 lying around, and this thing was on iOS 10 when I first picked it up, and I thought I'd flash iOS 14 on this thing to check it out, check out the new features and how it performs on this smartphone. Something amazing about Apple is that they support hardware for absolutely ages. So this thing is probably a decent few years old, but it still runs iOS 14 with absolutely no problems at all. Of course, with a toned down version of iOS 14, but it's definitely not as toned down as you might get from other manufacturers. So with that being said, let's go ahead and check out iOS 14's newest features on this iPhone 7. Okay, so one of the biggest visual changes you'll see with Apple's new software is widgets. If you took a shot every time the word widget was mentioned yesterday, you'd be in a questionable position at the moment. But jokes aside, the widgets themselves have been implemented pretty well. And let's face it, this isn't something new for Android users, but certainly for iOS users, it's a major change which they'll appreciate for sure. You still don't get complex customization or complete customization, so positioning widgets exactly where you want is a struggle, but it is a step in the right direction for sure. The widgets themselves look fairly rich and are well implemented, and it's just a matter of time before we start seeing these beautiful looking widgets from third-party applications as well. Some of these widgets also stack, which means you can swipe through them or they update according to relevance as well as time. Of course, this is going to make your home screen look cluttered, especially with a small screen smartphone like the iPhone 7, and that's where App Library comes into play. You access it at the very end of your app drawer and it collates all your applications in neat looking bins, which I think is great. You can easily search for an application from here, and that doesn't necessarily mean you'll have to constantly be swiping all the way to the right. You can configure your pages on iOS 14 to only show the most relevant ones. So for example, in my case, the first 3 ones with the widgets. I can choose not to show the other ones, so essentially I get access to my custom pages with widgets and app library right next to that without having to scroll through the clutter. Pretty neat. That's as far as straight up visual changes go for iOS 14, but Apple's packed quite a few new features and applications with the update too. Firstly, we finally get picture-in-picture mode. This should have been on the iPhone frankly years ago, but hey, better late than never. For the moment, it only works on native applications like FaceTime, and I found it very useful on Safari, for example. I think the overall feature is well implemented and it's definitely smooth feeling. Once again, it is a borrowed feature, but something it does do right which Android lacks is pinning. So say you're watching a video and you want to use the full screen for whatever reason, you can simply pin the video to the edge without dismissing it and keep it running in the background. I like this feature and it definitely is better implemented than Android, where the video just keeps on bouncing from different edges without you having the option to pin it, so it gets in the way in some form or shape. There's one more big change that I want to address, but before that, let's get to some small changes with applications. Calls when you're receiving them are now less intrusive, and Siri gets a much needed redesign, which I think will make users turn to it more often. Its notifications are also much smaller and don't take up the entire screen, so that's definitely welcome, and it comes with a number of improvements behind the scenes, including a faster keyboard dictation method which now happens on the device itself, and a feature to send audio messages for the first time. Of course, we'll have to wait and see how all of that works out with time, and let me know if you'd like to see some sort of comparison, maybe between this Siri and Google's Assistant or the previous generation Siri. I think that could be a cool video. Translate is another new application which makes interacting easier. You can have some real-time conversations on there, even offline if you download the languages, but it's not as polished of an application just yet. Plus, I think this library of languages will grow over time, and hopefully I'll get to test it out more so whenever traveling is a thing again. You also get updates to messages, which becomes similar to WhatsApp with things like pinning, specific mentions, and other visual changes, but I'm not an avid user of that. And while I'd love to try out the new Apple Maps features like cycling directions, they're limited to only a few places in the world for the time being. even though Dubai needs that feature as soon as possible to avoid congestion. Lastly, there's app clips, and this is a big feature for iOS 14 as well. It's similar to Android's instant apps, but given that Apple is jumping on this, I think the adoption will be more widespread. Basically, it allows users to download parts of an application up to 10 megabytes, coming in handy for things like on-the-go bike renting, discounts for certain food, etc. via NFC or QR codes. It also works on Safari, although it's still not up and running on this version of iOS 14, going by what we see on Apple's webpage, or at least on my iPhone 7, because you'd be able to see a smart app banner on this webpage if this thing worked as intended. But I think the concept is excellent, and if businesses adopt it, it could come in handy. App clips also store in a separate folder in your app library, so if you perhaps want to get the full application at a later stage, you can easily find it. But that's the extent to the changes for the most part. There's a strong focus on privacy with the update, so you can do other things like easier sign in with Apple and focus on migrating certain application accounts to sign in with Apple for a more streamlined experience, especially if you're using app clips, for example. There's also a small little indicator on the status bar whenever the phone is using the camera or the microphone, which is a nice touch. And there's a cool feature which I think is restricted for iPhone 10 and above, allowing users to use the accelerometer on the phone to accomplish tasks by tapping on the back of the phone. I wish that feature somehow made it to the iPhone 7, but I couldn't find it when digging around. Of course, this is a beta at the end of the day, so there are bugs and sometimes UI elements don't respond or are just not up to the mark yet. And battery, I don't know if this is a beta thing or an iPhone 7 thing, but battery seems to be draining faster than you can even charge it on the phone. So yeah, that's Apple's iOS 14 on the iPhone 7 and the majority of the things it brings with it. If you were to describe it in maybe a sentence or in a nutshell, I'd say it's Android 11 with Apple's special seasoning on top. I can see how it could be a major change for the core users of iOS who aren't particularly tech savvy, but for people who already know most of these features coming from Android, it's not that big of a deal. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you guys found it useful, and if you did, a like rating would be appreciated down below, and make sure you subscribe for more videos to come in the future. This was Vaibhav, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.